All right, our good friend Brad Graham at the SF Niners doing a great job at the Super Bowl. Talked to Mike Florio yesterday, and Florio's never been a Brock Purdy guy, but he made some waves with the statement that I'm about to play, and you probably already know what it's about. If you look at the title, if you look at the text underneath me, should the 49ers wait a year to pay Brock Purdy? And we can go through all of the reasons, tactically, financially, whatever you want, that would be idiotic. But first, let's listen to the opinion that we will use to base our discussion on from Mike Florio yesterday.
What do you see happening with Brock Purdy, and what do you project that contract looks like?
Well, I wouldn't sign him this year. I'd make him play another year. I think it's undetermined. I would make him an offer based upon what we've seen so far. I don't know what the magic number would be. The market's currently $60 million a year. When I offer him $35 to $40 million, maybe.
What we've seen so far. Okay. So what have we seen so far from Brock Purdy? So far from Brock Purdy, this is since 2022. This is a ranking of all quarterbacks in NFL efficiency. So far, we have seen more from Brock Purdy than almost any other quarterback in NFL history. In fact, I would say the only quarterback who showed more through their first 1,299 plays was Patrick Mahomes. So when Mike Florio says we need to see more from Brock Purdy, or based on what we've seen so far, is what he said. Well, this is what we've seen so far. Facts matter more than feelings. What we've seen so far has been the very top of the league. If you're going to base this on merit, if you're going to base this on resume, then Purdy has shown more than almost any other quarterback in NFL history, point blank. So, a lot of people try to have this argument and they try to say, well, his upside isn't there. He was picked down at number 262. So physically, he's not as imposing as other quarterbacks. Therefore, we should look for the 49ers to restrain how much they're going to pay him. Okay, fine. You're going to argue on subjectives, but don't move this into the territory of objective measurements. Don't say based on what we've seen so far and then act like Brock Purdy is Kyler Murray, who also made a ton of money, by the way. Don't act like Brock Purdy is Kenny Pickett. Don't act like Brock Purdy is Gardner Minshew. Brock Purdy is at the very, very top of the performance list based on what we've seen so far. So to me, that's a preposterous comparison right there. To say that and then to act like Brock Purdy hasn't been a top performer is disingenuous. And I think that gets at the root of a lot of these really poor Brock Purdy arguments that, people do not look at actual data, do not look at facts. They go with their feelings instead of the facts. Anyway, the question is, should the 49ers wait a year to pay Brock Purdy? We can completely toss Florio's main point out the window since it's based on what Brock Purdy has done so far, and his proposed price is not at all connected with Brock Purdy's resume. If your resume is right here, and this doesn't even include the playoffs, by the way. In the playoffs, Brock Purdy has outperformed a lot of other big money guys. But if your resume starts right here, you're not a $35 to $40 million quarterback. This is going to start in the 50s or in the 60s. We can argue about the semantics between 55 and 56, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62. We can argue about that until we're blue in the face. None of those matters. None of those numbers are going to matter when it comes to the actual effect of the contract. A lot of that's going to be vanity, but it's important to agents. Could be important to Brock Purdy to have a 6 in front of the APY number just because he's been better than Dak Prescott, who's currently at the top of the league with $60 million. But here's a look at the top 5 list for you just to begin things. But it's not going to be 35 or 40 million. That's what I can tell you for sure. This is your top 5 right now. This is what Brock Purdy has accomplished so far, not even including the postseason where he's been better than every single one of these QBs, maybe minus Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow might have a better postseason resume. But this is the market as far as APY goes. You're going to be dealing with numbers like this. You're not going to be dealing with numbers like 35 or 40 million. The point that we heard there from Mike Florio is immediately discredited by the fact that he is not objectively looking at performance. But the question is, and this goes to the larger point that he had, he said, I would just wait a year. Should the 49ers wait a year? And we can start listing why that would be a completely disastrous plan of attack. First off, assuming that Brock Purdy would just play along with that, which I don't think is a smart assumption at all, but assuming that Brock Purdy would be like, okay, they're not going to offer me a contract this offseason. I guess I'm just going to go play on my salary of $5.1 million. That's what it would be for 2025. 49ers would have to gauge Purdy's probability of a rebound season, because then you would have to pay him the next offseason, right? Like, it's either now or it's later. And if Brock Purdy delivers another good season, he was good this past year, his number 7 QBR, but if he delivers a season that's even better than that, you might be talking about a number that starts with a 7 in terms of APY. The market isn't going down for these quarterbacks. The market is only going up. And when we talk about the probability of a rebound season, consider the fact that the 49ers are going to be benefiting from a favorable schedule. They're playing a last place schedule this year. Consider the fact that they're almost certainly going to have a healthier team around Brock Purdy. Consider the fact that they're gunning to make improvements to both the offensive line and the entire defense. Well, the odds of Purdy having a better season next year, because so much of this is dependent on the team around you, the odds of that happening, I think, are relatively high. So you want to lock in today's price if you're the 49ers. You don't want to lock in tomorrow's price if you're the 49ers, because tomorrow's price will very, very, very likely be higher than today's price. That's the point of a long-term deal, is that you lock in the rate today. The Chiefs signed Patrick Mahomes to a 10-year deal worth $45 million per year. 10 years, $450 million. And at the time, people said, well, $450 million, that's a huge number. $45 million was at the top of the quarterback market. Well, look what the top of the quarterback market is now. $45 million isn't even on there. Josh Allen's number in the 40 millions isn't even on there. This market just continues escalating. So if you're the 49ers, then you gauge Purdy's probability of a bounce back season, and you realize that this is the cheapest that he'll probably be. All you have to do is look at the quarterback market. Then you have to look at this from Brock Purdy's angle, because protection from injury is an extremely important thing. And there's a reason why these guys become eligible for extensions after their third season, because players union fought for this in the CBA. And I think that the owners have generally commanded the proceedings in the CBA, but the players union was able to get the third year exit out of the rookie deal. You can renegotiate at the end of that third year. If you are a star player, you can earn yourself some real financial security after that third year. That's where Brock Purdy is right now. He's already been hurt, right? He's already dealt with that elbow that he bounced back so prolifically from after the 2022 season. But now's the time, especially after he's been playing at a discount, a severe discount, about $3 million for the first 3 seasons. Now's the time for him to get some financial security. All the other guys on this list were able to get financial security early on. Why wouldn't Brock Purdy be able to get financial security early on? What makes him different than these guys? Well, the only thing that makes him different than these guys is that he's been better than those guys. He hasn't been worse than them. This is a meritocracy. So from Purdy's perspective, I don't think you even entertain playing if you don't have a new contract. And that is where we get to this point. Consider leverage here. Brandon Ayuk didn't have a whole lot of leverage with the 49ers last year. He was a receiver. San Francisco waited him out. That's why they sat there with the same offer to Brandon Ayuk that he ended up signing for 3 weeks. And at the end, Brandon Ayuk was just laughing, saying, I made it a little bit harder than it had to be. In the National Football League, and you know who last had big-time leverage over the 49ers? Was Nick Bosa. And Nick Bosa's contract is still far and ahead of everybody else's on the defensive side of the ball. But in the NFL, leverage belongs to the quarterback, and it belongs to those who directly counteract the quarterback, edge rushers. So it's going to be really interesting with Myles Garrett. I know we've been talking a lot about that lately. So those two positions, edge rusher and QB, and to a certain extent, defensive tackle, if that defensive tackle is like Aaron Donald and could wreck the game from the inside. So let's just say defensive line in general. Anybody who could directly counteract the quarterback in less than 2.5 seconds is going to be really valuable in this league. But it's quarterback that truly runs things based on the rules, based on the setup of how everything works. QB is the ultimate leverage position. If Brock Purdy decides not to come to OTAs, not to come to training camp, decides not to play, the 49ers season is completely tanked. Without Brandon Ayuk last year, you could still see the 49ers contending. They had a whole heck of a lot of other stuff happen that obviously really cascaded on them, and then they were out of contention. But nobody's trying to argue that a receiver is more important than a quarterback. Just look at what happened in the 2022 season in the NFC Championship game. Once the 49ers lost Brock Purdy, the game was over. Brock Purdy was back the next year against Philadelphia. They won by, 25 points. It was a blowout. So QB is really, you can't dispute it. It's the most important position. So when we talk about leverage, like the 49ers really need Brock Purdy in the building. They need him to play. So if Purdy says that, no, I don't want to wait a year for a contract, then that's what's going to happen. He's not going to wait a year for the contract. The 49ers need him to come to the table. So this fantasy land that the 49ers can just wait a year to see what Brock Purdy is going to deliver over this fourth season is completely preposterous, because all it would take is Brock Purdy saying, no, I'm not playing until you give me a new contract, for that to be an option that's not on the table. They have to get something done this year. And anybody who has covered this credibly, anybody who's been remotely plugged into this situation, has indicated that it's going to get done this year, both from Purdy's side and from the 49ers side. This is common NFL business. It wouldn't even be possible to wait in this situation if you're the 49ers, because of what's at stake regarding the quarterback position. So then you get to the discussion of where the final number is going to be. Once you establish that this does have to be done for the 49ers' sake this offseason, and that obviously Brock Purdy wants something done, that's when you start breaking down potential numbers. That's when you start talking about playoff performance, and then obviously you get to the final contract projection, which I did get to a few weeks ago on the San Francisco Standard. Mike is texting me. He's like, Tua, Trevor Lawrence, all paid the big bucks. Yes, that did happen with all of those quarterbacks. Tim Kawakami wrote for the San Francisco Standard, which is my publication. It doesn't belong to me, but it's the one that I write for. We can put this up on the screen from Tim. He had one of the more recent updates. And Tim is a plugged-in guy, and I think that we could read in between the tea leaves when we get some of this stuff. I think that this has been the most substantive piece of information that we've gotten over the past few weeks. Tim said, I heard from a plugged-in NFL source this week that the 49ers and Purdy's camp are indeed feeling like there won't be fireworks on the way to an eventual deal. Then this is where it gets really interesting. The first part is obvious, except the people like Mike Florio. But beyond that, Tim says, but I've also heard generally that the framework might be a little different than some other recent NFL QB deals. I suspect this means the 49ers could be pitching a shorter-term, lesser guaranteed deal compared to the full commitment deals signed by Trevor Lawrence, Justin Herbert, and others over the last few years. Will Purdy and his agent be happy with that? Assuredly, there'll be some negotiations. Nobody makes their best offer right off the bat. It might take time. The middle part of this I'm not sure that I think this will align with the forces at play. And here's why. I actually think that a shorter term deal is not in the 49ers' interest. I think the 49ers want a longer term deal. I think that team control is something that the 49ers have fought for repeatedly in these contracts year after year after year. They want the 5 years of team control because the way that an NFL deal works, almost any NFL deal works, aside from Deshaun Watson's, which is the worst contract in NFL history, is like this. As you can see, this is my Brock Purdy contract projection, I guess I would say. The yellow shaded base salary years, 2025, 2026, and 2027, those are the only years that feature guaranteed money in the contract. Once you get to 2028, 2029, and 2030 in this proposed contract, that money is no longer guaranteed. So essentially, the 49ers have team control. They have contractual control over Brock Purdy. So that is leverage in and of itself. And you always have to consider leverage. The 49ers would maintain leverage over Brock Purdy despite not owing him any guaranteed money. If you gave Brock Purdy a shorter deal, say that it was only 2025, 2026, and 2027, just for argument's sake, there would almost assuredly be guaranteed money in all of those early seasons, and then you just wouldn't have the team control. I mean, it doesn't matter if the base salary is 50 million, and 61 million in 28, 29, 2030 if none of that's guaranteed. People need to understand a lot of these NFL contracts are built on air just to inflate the APY. It makes the agents feel better. It makes the players feel better. But the teams ultimately have control over a player that doesn't have guaranteed money. A great example is Javon Hargrave. Eric Armstead last year. Eric Armstead was set to make what, 20 million? Javon Hargrave, 21 million, something like that. None of it was guaranteed. Both of those defensive tackles had passed the guaranteed money portion of their contract. So the 49ers could just rip up the contract and say, hey, take a pay cut or leave. Well, we don't owe you this money. So the team has the contractual control, but the money is there on the player's books, but the team has the contractual control. So the same thing would be the case in any deal, but the one that I projected for Brock Purdy right here, the team owns the rights of the player up until 2030. So I think, I go back to this, and I think the 49ers are going to fight for a longer deal. Why wouldn't you want to fight for a longer deal with a quarterback? I think that the guaranteed money is a related but ultimately separate question. And it's one that we can toss in right here. Mike wants me to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo's contract, which I will. We're going to go back to analyze that. By the way, Jimmy Garoppolo's contract was extremely favorable to the 49ers. That was a great deal that they signed with Jimmy Garoppolo, and it was the top deal in the league. It was the number one deal in the league. Everybody, was saying, well, they need to wait a year. It ended up being financially beneficial for the 49ers to sign Garoppolo in 2018 after only those 5 games because of the way that this contract is structured, because of the way that NFL deals are able to maintain team control with no guaranteed money, usually past year 2 for a truly marquee player. And I think Purdy has probably earned that past year 3. But this is a fully guaranteed money conversation as well. So I want to address this part of the discussion before we move on. Mike, if you can find a spreadsheet breakdown of Jimmy Garoppolo's contract that he signed in 2018, I might have tweeted it. Somebody might have tweeted it. If you can send that to me, it'll be much easier for me to get that up on the screen while I'm talking right now. But fully guaranteed money is something to truly look out for. That's something that Tim mentioned in his writing up on the San Francisco Standard. Deshaun Watson, I've been talking about this a lot because the discussion has been about Myles Garrett. The reason that the Browns are in a terrible spot right now is because they decided to pay $230 million fully guaranteed to Deshaun Watson. To help you understand that, we look at Purdy's contract right here. Do you see how there's parts of it that are not shaded in a certain color? That means those are non-guaranteed parts. The Browns essentially gave Deshaun Watson a contract like this, but every single part is shaded to denote a guarantee. So this 50 million would be shaded. This 50 million would be shaded. This 61 million would be shaded. There is no leeway for the Browns. They are firmly tethered to Deshaun Watson for better or for worse. And obviously it has been for worse with Deshaun Watson. So that's why he's at the very top. Nobody else does this in the NFL. Only the Browns gave up that much fully guaranteed money to a player with no leeway whatsoever. Other teams have left themselves with the standard leeway, the same type of structure that I showed you with the Brock Purdy contract. Other teams have done it with Joe Burrow and the Bengals, Trevor Lawrence and the Jags, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, Justin Herbert and the Chargers. That's the type of deal that you can expect Brock Purdy to get from the 49ers, something with leeway for the team. Then, once you determine the amount of fully guaranteed money, which I think is a much better indicator of how strong a contract is. So say that Purdy gets somewhere in the 130s or 140s. Tim is implying that maybe there's a world in which he gets less. But once you have that fully guaranteed money amount, then you could start really talking about the strength of the deal. But that still has very, very little to do with the final APY. And the final APY is this right here. This is more of the vanity number. And this is the number where people are talking about 35 or 40 million. And it's like, okay, we can laugh you out the building. It's not going to be that low. The APY, it's going to be important on the surface level to the agents, to the executives on the 49ers side, probably to Brock Purdy himself. You're going to be dealing with this kind of ballpark because regardless of how you get there, even if it's a deal that is not great for the player, you can get there fairly easily. You can inflate a contract APY-wise through the non-guaranteed money. That at the end of the day, it's just an average. So hopefully that helps people understand the dynamics here. We're going to take a look at Jimmy Garoppolo's contract. Mike was able to find it. It looks like we're going to get it off of Spot Rack. I'm going to toss this onto the screen. Garoppolo's deal, to this day, remains one of the more misunderstood contracts. And maybe we can put that to rest talking about this. So this is Garoppolo's deal. I'm going to try to find a way to, there. We can get it up on the screen. Hopefully that's big enough for everybody to see. So this was really interesting because the 49ers front-loaded this contract. This was back when they didn't have a lot of talent on the football team in 2018. So instead of backloading the contract with a massive signing bonus, they actually gave Garoppolo a signing bonus worth only about $6 million. It prorated to $1.4 million per season because you stretch that signing bonus out over the seasons. And they gave him a big roster bonus in that first season. Base salary 6.2, but a roster bonus of $28.8 million. So Garoppolo had like $36 million. No, even more of cash flow because the signing bonus, $6 million. He had over $40 million of cash flow in the first season and a salary cap hit of $37 million in that first season. Then Garoppolo's cap hits leveled out to 20, 26, 26, and 27 million. The deal for Jimmy Garoppolo was the top deal in all football. And people saw the number one billing of the deal and they thought, oh my gosh, they're paying him way too much. It's a massive risk. Not really. It wasn't a risk at all for the 49ers. And when you look back on it, because they had an out after the second year, where in every single season after that second year, they would have been able to let go of Jimmy Garoppolo at a dead money cost of only a maximum $4.2 million, down to $2.8 million in 2021, down to $1.4 million in 2022. The 49ers were flexible in every single season after the Super Bowl season of 2019 to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. 2020, 2021, 2022, utmost flexibility, which is why they were open to the idea of Tom Brady after 2019, but they decided Jimmy's a good quarterback. We're going to keep Jimmy after 2019. That's why they looked into Trey Lance after Jimmy Garoppolo got hurt in 2020. but they were still able to keep Jimmy Garoppolo, and they decided that they wanted to keep Jimmy Garoppolo, even though the financial out was not a difficult one for San Francisco at that 2021 season. $2.8 million in dead money would have hurt nobody. 2022, well, they decided to keep him again. They were able to get him on a restructured deal then in 2022 and save a boatload of money. But the contract gave the 49ers ultimate option power. I talked about option power a lot through those 2020, 2021, 2022 years. So you can give a quarterback the very top dollar, yet maintain flexibility. Garoppolo got a good deal for the 49ers. 49ers can find an advantageous deal for Brock Purdy, just because that's how NFL deals are structured. You know, you can find a win-win. Brock Purdy can become the richest quarterback in NFL history, and the 49ers can still have a contract that is flexible. And the Garoppolo deal, which was number one in the entire quarterback market, proves that. So does my work. Like, I actually do the work. I actually project contracts. I actually study how the 49ers have operated in the past. I actually talk to people and I illustrate this. I don't just sit down and say, oh, 35 to 45 million. You know what was funny? After I came out with this contract projection, a lot of people who like to talk about this stuff on the internet without really knowing what goes behind it, they had been talking about 45, 50 million. More than one person gets online and says, I've amended my projection to over 60 million for Brock Purdy. Of course, they didn't mention me. They didn't give me any credit. It's okay. But just because somebody actually does the work and shows that a win-win is possible, you know, it's funny that is what it takes for people to just stop talking out of thin air. There is perspective to be had with these contracts and with these discussions. And in the NFL, they're almost always not necessarily team friendly, but they have team escape clauses. And a team escape clause means that you'd rather do the business sooner than later. If the 49ers were willing to do that business with Jimmy Garoppolo 5 games into his tenure with the 49ers, they're certainly going to be willing to do that business with Brock Purdy 3 seasons into his tenure. 3 seasons in, most efficient quarterback in the league. It is an absolute no-brainer for the 49ers to get it done this offseason, especially since they won't have a choice. We can just go back and consider the fact that Brock Purdy has ultimate leverage here. You can say that he's not playing on his current deal and move from there. Quarterback is that important in this league. You can't mess around with the money at the quarterback position. You can't mess around with the contracts at the quarterback position because they're only going to get more expensive, and you can't live without the QB, especially a really good one. All right, let's open this up to some questions. I've got some other stuff to talk about Purdy, Mahomes, as we tie it into the Super Bowl this week. Some really interesting stats with Patrick Mahomes. You got to love the Super Bowl because in the build-up to the Super Bowl, everybody is focusing all of their advanced analytic efforts on that game. So you get to see some new numbers, some really cool breakdowns of how the guys are performing. And in the case of the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes this year had a very Andy Reid-fueled year. Something that I don't think that Brock Purdy benefited from on the Kyle Shanahan side. So we'll discuss that in a little bit. But first, we're going to open this up to a nice 49ers morning Q&A. See what Mike has to say before I delve into the comments section. Mike, not saying much right now, which is okay. That's all good. This show is brought to you by Public Rec. Public Rec is the creator of the Game Changer pants, the ones that can be sweatpants or they can be formal pants at the same time. Public Rec, I mean, I know I've talked about these now for a couple months. I think that they probably are my favorite pants right now. I will say that. I've got some from Lululemon, but these ones from Public Rec, like even more. Usually when you order comfortable pants, you only get to pick from small, medium, large, and extra large sizes. With Public Rec pants, you get to select the exact width and exact length that you need. Whether you're a 30 by 30 or a 44 by 36, you can find your perfect fitting pants. And they come in many unique colors from navy, dark olive, and stone gray. You're sure to find the right color for you. This February, treat yourself right because comfort is always in season. Upgrade the Public Rec and feel the difference. For a limited time, you can get 20% off at Public Rec by using the code Lombardi at checkout. Just head to publicrec.com, use the code Lombardi, and you're all set. Oh, and when they ask you how you found them, be sure to mention our show. It really helps us out. Find your perfect fit and never compromise on comfort again. Public Rec, where comfort rules. '49ers Q&A time. Let's go. You're curious what leverage Purdy's negotiating for me? He's a good quarterback in the NFL. What leverage was Dak Prescott negotiating from last year when he got $60 million a year? Brock Purdy's a good quarterback in the NFL. This is not that complicated, and quarterback is the most important position. The fact that Brock Purdy's down year was number 7 in the NFL in QBR is leverage in and of itself. That was his floor. Everything around him is blowing up. He's still number 7 in QBR. He has the best resume of any quarterback over his first 3 years, probably outside of Patrick Mahomes. That's the efficiency over the past 3 years in the NFL, by the way. That's where Purdy ranks. So it doesn't matter what other team would be banging down the door for him. That's a lot of teams would, first of all. A lot of teams are desperate for top-level quarterback play, but it's a completely irrelevant nugget. He's under contract with the 49ers, and the 49ers are the ones that need him to play quarterback for them. That's how the market is determined. So the fact that Brock Purdy is the last question here, the fact that Brock Purdy is a good NFL quarterback whom the 49ers need absolutely affects negotiations. Quarterbacks have leverage more than any other position in the National Football League. Anybody's leverage in any negotiation is based on what the other side would do. How much would the other side freak out if they walked away from the table? If Brock Purdy walks away from the table, the 49ers are in huge trouble in 2024, 2025. That's just the realistic part of this deal. So I don't know what else to tell you guys. Any update on the Purdy injury? What injury? Purdy's healthy. He's good. I know he missed the last game of the season, but he's fine. How do Joe Montana and Steve Young contracts compare to modern-day quarterbacks? That's a great question. Much smaller. Let's see. Joe Montana contract. Let's go back and look this up. Joe Montana, biggest contract. Joe Montana's highest salary was $13 million per year for a 4-year deal with the 49ers in 1990. It was the highest paid contract in the NFL at the time. Montana's NFL career earnings were a little bit over $25 million. His first contract was $255,000 over 3 years. Wow. Joe Montana was making $255,000 over 3 years. So 255 divided by 3, he was making well less than $100,000 per year. That's how much things have changed since 1979. Steve Young's biggest contract. Well, Steve Young's biggest contract was actually in the USFL, but he didn't make all of the money because the league went defunct. He signed a contract that was an annuity. It was a $36 million contract with the Los Angeles Express in 1984 that would pay him over 43 years. But I'm fairly certain Steve has not gotten all of that money. We'll ask him at some point. He's shared stories about that because the USFL obviously only lasted for 2 seasons. That at the time was the biggest contract in professional sports history. The USFL was trying to lure NFL talent to its league, but it quickly became apparent that that was not going to work. I want to know Steve Young's largest 49ers contract, a 5-year, $25 million extension with the 49ers. Then he signed a 6-year, $49 million extension with San Francisco in 1993. I think that was his last contract. 6 years, $49 million for Steve Young. So that's about it's about between 8 and 9 million a year. Joe Montana had a 4-year contract worth $13 million a year. Unbelievable how the numbers have ballooned since then. Yeah, and I guess this is a good one. I can't forget about inflation. Would 13 million really be about 31 million today? There's inflation in normal US dollar value, and then there's also salary cap inflation, right? The salary cap gets bigger. And I know the salary cap didn't get instituted until the mid-1990s. So that Joe Montana contract was pre-salary cap. And then Steve Young's contract essentially came in the salary cap era, the big one in 1993. Chris, I owe you an email back. We were in Paris last week. That's why I haven't emailed you back. Chris thinks the 49ers winning the Super Bowl is in the script. Mike is saying exactly what I was saying earlier. It might cost the 49ers $70 million per year, given everything that could transpire moving forward. I mean, when you look at this, the probability of a rebound season for Brock Purdy is very, very high. I think that when I talk about floor and ceiling for a quarterback, and we talk about performance floor and performance ceiling that goes along with that, that's been demonstrated from Brock Purdy to be more impressive than any quarterback outside of Joe Burrow at this point. Like, his QBR ceiling is obviously number 1, and his QBR floor has been number 7. I think Burrow and Josh Allen both have very tight ranges as far as QB floor and QB ceiling. And Josh Allen, obviously 2020 and beyond, his first couple of years, he wasn't very good at all. But the way that the bottom drops out for a lot of quarterbacks when they have suboptimal years, you could see quarterbacks. I mean, somebody like CJ Stroud, I know he's still a young quarterback, so it's not a veteran QB example, but he dropped all the way down to like number 25 in QBR this year. He wasn't that high to begin with last year. I thought that he was a little overinflated. He was like number 15, but the range for CJ Stroud has been 15 to 25. The range for Patrick Mahomes has been 1 to like number 11 or number 12 in QBR. A lot of quarterbacks you'll see top 5 season, but then somewhere between 15 and 20 in their worst seasons. So far, when things have lined up really well for Brock Purdy, we've seen number 1. When everything has gone wrong, I can't think of anything else that could have gone wrong for the 49ers around Brock Purdy in 2024. It dropped only to number 7. So the probability of a rebound season, despite the fact he only dropped down to number 7, I think is very high. And the 49ers, any smart businessman has to realize that. You always like to buy low, right? So if you're going to buy this contract, if you're the 49ers, buy it right now. Like, buy the stock when it's as low as it's possibly going to be. And even because of quarterback leverage, because of dynamics in this league and the importance of the position, even the low price for Brock Purdy is probably going to be a market-setting price. And that's also thanks to the fact that his performance floor has proven to be so high, number 7 QBR. Any objective look at how Brock Purdy played this past year recognizes the difficulties that the 49ers had around him. I think the top one is the separation. I'm working on this State of the 49ers series right now, and the lack of separation that San Francisco generated from its receiving core without Brandon Ayuk, without Christian McCaffrey for most of the season, was staggering. They were ranked last in the NFL. The man coverage efficiency plummeted this year. They're fine against zone because that didn't rely as much on separation, but against man, they couldn't get it done. So everybody started playing man against them, and that it was bad. It was bad over the course of the season. No quarterback in the league is going to be able to succeed if his receivers can't get open against man coverage. And the 49ers quite literally ranked last in the league. I don't see it as high probability that repeats itself in 2025. I mean, regardless of whether or not they get an A-list version of Brandon Ayuk back, the 49ers are going to be working through other avenues to ensure that a dead last finish and average separation doesn't repeat itself, right? So it's all a no-brainer from a business and a financial perspective. This is not something that you wait for if you're the 49ers. Mike said that $14 million in 1990 is equivalent in purchasing power to about $33.8 million in 2025. So Montana at $13 million per year. Yes, it was around 31 or 32 million. So even given inflation, though, just on the standard US dollar, that's still about half of what quarterbacks are making annually now at the 60 million mark at the top for Dak Prescott. So we've seen US dollar inflation and NFL salary inflation about 2x at the top of the quarterback market. But that is the cost of doing business in this league. Both Jerry Rice and Steve Young did play before the salary cap existed, but they also played after it existed. That was the 49ers of the late 1990s. That was the 49ers of the late 1990s who were holding on for dear life. The salary cap came into existence right before they beat the Cowboys in that epic NFC Championship game, right before they won their most recent Super Bowl against the San Diego Chargers, 49-26. The 30th anniversary was last week. The 49ers would yank players off the practice field. They'd be in cleats, muddy uniforms. They'd come up into the office of Carmen Policy, who was the general manager, and they would sign restructured contracts in those years in the mid-1990s because the salary cap was coming into existence, and they needed to push salary cap hits into the future. So they needed to open up salary cap space to bring in players for that last hurrah in the 1994 season. Brent Jones restructured his contract in full pads and uniform. He was sweating coming off the practice field. In Carmen Policy's office, Brent Jones is signing a contract. The 49ers paid for it over the back half of the 90s. There were several things that led to their gradual decline. One was not being able to re-sign Ricky Waters. So they lost the running back threat. They lost the Christian McCaffrey-like threat they had on that team. But the further they got into the 90s and the salary cap, the more they started to have to pay the bills that they had pushed downstream, and the salary cap wasn't growing fast enough like it is today for them to surf that wave. They weren't as good at surfing the wave as they are today either. They weren't doing the delicate things financially. And ultimately, that roster, when it wasn't replenished with the appropriate draft picks, when guys like Jim Druckenmiller were swinging and missing at that quarterback position, ultimately the 49ers hit a level of cap hell that could no longer sustain itself even through inevitable injuries that come to veteran players. So Jerry Rice, I remember he tore his ACL, tried to come back, and then he cracked his patella. Steve Young, the concussion after Aeneas Williams hit him in 1999. I mean, that was the end for the 49ers dynasty. Now, they rebuilt the team very quickly under Steve Mariucci with Jeff Garcia, but they never reached the heights that they had reached before. The closest then that they got to the Super Bowl since then has been the Harbaugh teams and the Shanahan teams. So now they're trying to crack the code with the salary cap. And I think that the way that Parag Marathe and the 49ers, and it goes back to John Lynch too, but the way that they're managing the salary cap and the way that they're surfing the wave now of the growing cap has been some of the best work of this front office since the dynastic run 30 plus years ago. Now, all they have to do is kick down the door and win. Fred Warner just revealed on the Pat McAfee show that the Christian McCaffrey injury was a total shock to the team last season. He felt great, and that injury came out of nowhere. It was a shock to him and us. Exactly what I reported. A lot of people, did the 49ers know about this? Or are they hiding injuries? They didn't know about it. Christian was running around at practice looking explosive, and then all of a sudden his Achilles flared up. I mean, it's shit happens. This is the NFL. I mean, this is a battle day in, day out, a battle against the unexpected. And then even the expected is hard to conquer. But everybody was looking for somebody to blame at that time before week one when Christian McCaffrey ended up landing on injured reserve, or I guess it was right after week one that they put him on IR. Sometimes you're just dealt a bad card, and the 49ers were dealt a lot of bad cards last season. So I think Fred Warner just verified what we did know, but what a lot of people were very adamant wasn't true. It was true. The 49ers were taken by surprise by Christian McCaffrey's injury. How dare me? Chris came here for a family-friendly show. When would I expect the Brock star to be signed? Well, I don't know an exact date, but I don't think that it will happen before the salary cap is known. The salary cap is not going to be known until later this month. I think that's really important information. Without knowing what the salary cap is going to be, the 49ers would be operating in the dark. There'd be more guesswork than is necessary in this case. Do I think the 49ers must re-sign Purdy before March 12th? No. Hey, that's the thing. 49ers do have the luxury of time on their side. The big thing here is, would Purdy show up to OTAs, an off-season program, without a contract, a new contract? Obviously, you want him there. Is it mandatory for him to be there? No. I do think, though, that the 49ers, after dealing with all they did over the past couple seasons, especially with the Ayuk situation last year, you do want to get this settled sooner rather than later. But is it mandatory? Do they have to re-sign him? Is it a must? No. They do have the luxury of time to at least training camp. But training camp is when Purdy can really put the 49ers' feet to the fire. That's when he could start exerting the leverage he does as a starting quarterback, a good starting quarterback in this league. I love the comments that just come in. Is like, are you watching the show? Let Purdy play out the year before offering a contract. Okay, Purdy would just sit at home and then you'd be screwed as a team. Like, guys, we've been talking about this for 47 minutes and then you just comment something like this. Ridiculous. Come on, let's pay attention here. Stay with the program. Dallin predicts Purdy is going to be signed before OTAs. That'd be a refreshing change for the 49ers, who dealt with all this offseason drama over the course of the past couple years. Yeah, people really aren't listening. It's too bad. And then, again, it's not a risk to pay Purdy right now. It's business to pay Purdy right now. It's business. It's not like the biggest risk of all would be not paying Brock Purdy, having him not show up, and then entering the season without a quarterback. Do you realize that the risky option is the one that would divert from conventional business? Conventional business in the NFL is, you get a quarterback who is this good. You pay him when you can because you're sure about him. The 49ers are sure about Brock Purdy. And you have the outs in the contract that are part of any standard NFL contract except for Deshaun Watson's. You have these outs. It is a simple equation. Anybody who's trying to make it different than this or more than this just doesn't know what they're talking about. They're illiterate to contracts. They're illiterate to how NFL business works. They're illiterate to evaluating the quarterback position. All of those. I guess if you're illiterate to all of those things, you'll come up with crazy takes like, let's wait to pay Brock Purdy, because that's not even possible, right? So let's listen all I'm doing is sharing facts. I'm not really sharing opinions here. I'm just sharing facts. I know that facts upset people. I know that people, like to whine on their YouTube channels and that, they're desperate for clicks because everybody's watching this channel instead of theirs. But sorry, the reason people watch this one instead of the other ones is because we deliver cold, hard facts. And those upset people sometimes, but I think that people ultimately just want truth. People ultimately want an objective look at how contracts work. People don't want commentary like, oh, they should wait to pay Purdy when that would in fact be impossible. And it would be very, very expensive for the 49ers because the quarterback market is only moving up. Yeah, they're called internet GMs. Well, we're not internet GMs here. Well, at least we're good internet GMs. If we're going to play GM, we'll do a good job of it. We'll have the roster out. We'll look objectively at the salary cap. We'll look at 49ers history. We'll look at behavioral history from Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. There's a way to base all of this on bedrock instead of, on flimsy, thin ice. No, the Purdy deal does not have to be done before any other deals. Again, the 49ers would love to reach a mutually beneficial agreement as soon as possible, but negotiating takes time. And if both sides are at odds on something key in this contract, then it's going to take a little bit longer. I think there's a higher sense of urgency to get something for a quarterback done, especially one as good as Brock Purdy, one that the 49ers are reliant on. But the timing is still going to be the timing in this case. Are there any other quarterback deals up right now? Nothing. I mean, there obviously are other deals up, but nothing in the Purdy caliber, nothing in the Purdy stratosphere. We always said that the last domino before Brock Purdy was going to be Dak Prescott. And then Dak Prescott signed for this right before the season. Now, it is worth mentioning that this was right before the season and that Dak was closer to franchise tag type of situation with the Cowboys. Well, was he already on a franchise? I can't remember where he was at, but he did have considerable leverage that might have even exceeded Brock Purdy's. Besides the fact that Prescott is a quarterback that the Cowboys needed, that they needed to get the deal done with a lot of urgency right before that season started. So he was able to strong arm Dallas, but the reason he was able to strong arm Dallas is that the Cowboys took so long to get to that point. I mean, it was right before the start of the regular season. It was another illustration of get your business done early if you can at that quarterback position. And the other quarterbacks on this list, so many of them, that was the product of business getting done early. Yeah, the Cowboys have fumbled a lot of situations lately, right? Hasn't been pretty for Dallas over the course of the last 30 years. They have the longest NFC title game drought of any team in the NFL. Unbelievable from the Dallas perspective. Given the allure of that franchise or the allure that it used to have, the way that they've squandered that has not been good. Again, Purdy has shown more than almost any other quarterback in NFL history up to this point. When we go back and let's do the little recap of what we're talking about. Should the 49ers wait a year to pay Brock Purdy? I got this from Brad Graham, who's been doing a great job at the Super Bowl. This is Mike Florio's thought on the situation.
What do you see happening with Brock Purdy, and what do you project that contract looks like?
Well, I wouldn't sign him this year. I'd make him play another year. I think it's undetermined. I would make him an offer based upon what we've seen so far. I don't know what the magic number would be. The market's currently $60 million a year. Would I offer him $35 to $40 million? Maybe.
based on what he's done so far. So everything that Mike Florio is saying is based on what Brock Purdy has done so far. All right. What has Brock Purdy done so far? This is what Brock Purdy has done so far. Number one in efficiency since joining the league. 4 playoff wins. More than almost anybody else on that list. Like, it's crazy. You go, only the very, very top guys have more. Obviously, Burrow has more. Mahomes has more. How many does Jalen Hurts have at this point? Yeah, I think Jalen Hurts is an entirely separate discussion. We're going to talk about Mahomes, Purdy, and Hurts in a different show. But Jalen Hurts deserves some credit for what Philadelphia is doing. That being said, he doesn't deserve as much credit as Brock Purdy and Joe Burrow and some of these other quarterbacks just because of other very, very intricate things. Like he's throwing a lot off of play action. I could get into that a little bit later, but Purdy, the resume, the factual resume doesn't lie. It is what it is. You see it right here. Brock Purdy is at the very top of the league in efficiency since that 2022 season. So he's already shown what he does need to show to command upper limit money. Upper limit money is this. These are the types of numbers we're going to be dealing with. We can discuss the exact permutations underneath that once this deal is done. But to think that it's going to be anything outside the ballpark of this is absurd, and such thoughts are just not rooted in fact. And no, the 49ers cannot wait a year to pay Brock Purdy because all you have to do is consider leverage in this instance, and leverage lies with quarterbacks in the NFL. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. We're up to, I wanted to get to 56 minutes. 56 minutes seemed like a good time. We'll talk to you soon.